A racist man mocks Big Shaq for using a public bathroom. Just a regular stop, turned into a storm. But what started as cruelty sparked a chain of truth the whole town tried to bury. Big Shaq didn't argue, didn't fight, just stood tall. And what happened next? It shattered silence, exposed secrets, and forced a town to face the mirror. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun was sitting just right in the sky, high and golden, warming the black mat of the Escalade, as it cruised down a narrow southern road, surrounded by empty fields and stubborn pine trees. Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq to the world, just Shaq to himself, had the windows rolled halfway down, letting that humid breeze roll in and carry the scent of earth, old towns, and long-buried memories. He wasn't here for fame, wasn't chasing headlines or applause. No cameras, no sneakers to sign, just a man with too much water in his system, and too few open doors in this stretch of nowhere. GPS had cut out miles back, the playlist had gone quiet, and all that was left was the low hum of tires on worn asphalt, and the thoughts swirling in his head. There's something different about being tall in places where the ceilings were never built for you. Shaq had learned that long before he was a household name, when he was just another lanky black kid walking into spaces where people flinched before smiling. He knew the looks. The tight-lipped nod, the forced chuckles, the sideways glances that always lasted a second too long. He didn't wear chains, didn't flash bills, didn't need to. His presence alone was thunder in a quiet room. But this time, in this town whose name he hadn't even noticed on the rusted road sign back there, he wasn't trying to make noise, he just needed to take a piss. He turned onto a gravel road, past a blinking light that barely deserved to be called a traffic signal, and found himself pulling into the lot of a small gas station. No name on the sign. Just open flickering weakly in red neon above the door, the kind of place where soda was still 99 cents, and the floor creaked louder than the welcome bell. He sat in the car a moment longer than necessary. Not because he was tired, though he was. Not because the seat was comfortable, though it was. But because something in the air didn't sit right. He couldn't name it, couldn't touch it, just felt it, low and deep in the gut, like a warning in a whisper. Maybe it was the truck parked sideways across 3 spaces. Maybe it was the man sitting in the rocking chair outside, watching him with that kind of stare that's never just curiosity. Maybe it was the silence, the kind that waits for things to go wrong. He adjusted his hat low, stepped out slowly, keys in hand, hoodie draped over his back like a shield. 6'7" frame unfolding, like a mountain into the hot southern sun, and right there, with gravel crunching under his sneakers, and the scent of gasoline cutting the heat, he felt it again. He was being watched. Not like fans at an arena, not like kids with dreams. This was different. This was colder, quieter, the kind of watchfulness that doesn't cheer for you to win, just waits for you to make a mistake. He walked toward the station door, shoulders relaxed, heartbeat steady. He could feel eyes from inside. The glass wasn't one way, but it might as well have been. Behind that pane stood a version of America that didn't know how to look at him without seeing something to fear or mock or question. He pushed open the door. Inside, it was dimmer than expected. The lights buzzed faintly above. Rows of chips and candy lined dusty shelves. A woman in her 60s stood behind the counter, talking to a tall man with a crooked back and a sheriff's badge that looked like it hadn't seen official use since the night. They paused when he entered. Not startled, just alert. Shaq offered a nod. Nothing forced, nothing extra, just a man needing a restroom. Back corner, the woman said, voice flat, like she was reading from a script she didn't want to perform. She pointed past the coolers, where a flickering bulb hung above a faded door labeled restroom, customers only. He nodded again, moving past the aisles, careful not to bump anything. Even his silence was loud here. As he neared the door he heard it, low enough not to be confrontational, loud enough that he was meant to hear. Well, I'll be damned. Must be a record-breaking flush. A pause. Didn't know giants used the same bathrooms as the rest of us. The words rolled off with the kind of smile you couldn't see but could feel, wet with smugness, coated in old hate, disguised as small-town humor. Shaq didn't turn around, didn't flinch, just placed his hand on the handle, and stepped inside. The room was small, tight, no windows, the kind of place where your back almost brushes the wall just to stand at the sink. He exhaled slow, looked at his own reflection in the cracked mirror above the basin. Even here, in a space meant for solitude, he didn't feel alone. He washed his hands longer than he needed to, not because they were dirty, but because he needed a pause, a break from the performance, from being Shaquille O'Neal, the man who could take a hit, who could be the bigger person, again and again and again. The mirror didn't lie. It never had. He saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the way time had settled in the creases of his face. He saw his own reflection like a portrait. Someone else had painted broad, powerful, intimidating to those who never knew what kindness lived behind the stare. He wasn't mad. Not yet. Just tired. He dried his hands on the rough brown paper towel, tossed it in the bin, and stepped back out. The man was still there, leaning on the counter now. The woman avoided eye contact. The air was still too quiet. A customer in the corner pretended to scroll on her phone, but she hadn't tapped the screen once. Shaq didn't say a word, just walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water and set it on the counter. The woman scanned it. The price beeped. He paid in cash. The man chuckled again, under his breath, but loud enough. Guess even money can't buy you manners. Shaq picked up his water, looked the man in the eyes just once. No anger, no threat, just that same, slow gaze that made men question themselves later, alone in their thoughts. He walked out without another word. Back in the car, he shut the door slow. The air inside felt thick, still warm, but heavier now. He took a sip of water, let it sit on his tongue, then swallowed hard, as if washing something else down with it. That gas station had been nothing, and yet somehow, everything. He didn't know yet what would unravel in the hours to come. Didn't know who would be hurt, who would break, who would stand up, or fall apart. But something had shifted, something small, like the click of a locked door being opened from the inside. As the car rolled back onto the road, Shaq didn't look in the rearview mirror. He already knew what he'd see. And somehow, the road ahead felt darker than it did when he arrived. The road stretched ahead like an old scar, winding past forgotten towns with peeling paint and porch chairs that hadn't been rocked in years. Shaq kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on his knee, eyes scanning the stretch of highway that felt both endless and empty. His phone had lost signal 20 minutes back. The air was thick with that sticky southern heat, and the need for a bathroom break had turned from casual to pressing. He caught sight of a lopsided billboard ahead, half covered in ivy, with the faint lettering, Colburn's Corner Gas, Goods, Grub. It was the only sign of life in miles. He turned off. The gas station sat like it had always been there, low, wide, and too still. Dust coated its windows. An ancient ice machine buzzed near the door, louder than it needed to be. A weathered Coca-Cola sign hung crooked above the entrance, swaying gently in the breeze, and just beneath it, seated on a split wood bench, was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the very land. Leathery skin, boots that had seen decades, and a badge-shaped belt buckle catching glints of sun. He didn't move when Shaq pulled in, just narrowed his eyes and kept chewing the toothpick stuck in the corner of his mouth. Shaq parked, opened the door, and stood. He stretched his shoulders, towering like a tree above the car, the full weight of his presence landing in that gravel lot. As he walked toward the entrance, he felt it, the low-grade static of eyes watching, measuring. A woman in a sundress paused at the pump, hesitating mid-click. A young man with a mop inside the store froze, then quickly pretended to clean again. It was subtle, that shift in air. The way people pause just a second longer than they should. The kind of stillness that follows a storm, or waits for one. Inside it smelled of rubber, motor oil, and something sweet turning sour. The aisles were tight, cluttered with snacks and faded signage. The humming of fluorescent lights seemed louder than necessary. At the back of the store, beside a rack of beef jerky and outdated maps, stood a thick wooden door with a crooked hand-painted sign above it. Restroom, ask for key. Shaq approached the counter where the man from outside had now stationed himself. Behind him, on the wall, hung an old black and white photo. Sheriff's uniform, wide-brimmed hat, shotgun in hand. The man looked up from under his brow, smirk tugging just slightly at the edge of his face. "Bathroom's locked," he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. His voice was gravel and grit, with just enough syrup to make the next part sting. "We keep it that way. Never know who's gonna wander in." Shaq didn't rise to it. He offered a polite nod, keeping his voice calm, measured. "Mind if I use it?" Just passing through. The man leaned back slightly, like he was weighing something heavy and invisible. You got business around here, he asked. Like that was the toll to use the facilities. Just the road, Shaq replied. The silence that followed felt too long. Then the man let out a small chuckle and reached beneath the counter, pulling out a rusty metal key attached to a wooden paddle, like something from a camp lodge. He set it down slowly, never breaking eye contact. Don't break the seat. It was meant to be a joke about size, a joke about worth, a joke told not with a smile, but a smirk meant to twist something deeper. Shaq didn't flinch. He picked up the paddle, nodded once more and walked to the back of the store. The kid with the mop watched him go, eyes wide, like he'd seen something dangerous move past. The key stuck a little in the lock, and the door groaned open. The restroom was small, yellow lit, and suffocating. No window, no scent of cleaning product. Just the bare minimum to meet a code no one enforced. He closed the door behind him, exhaled, and stared at himself in the mirror above the chipped sink. His reflection didn't blink. He'd been here before. Not this exact room maybe, but this moment, this feeling, where a basic human need became a confrontation, where the body he lived in became a symbol other people feared or ridiculed. He washed his hands longer than necessary, the water running cool over skin that had blocked 1,000 shots and held 1,000,000 memories. He dried them off with a torn paper towel, then opened the door to find the same man, Grady Colburn, his name etched on a plaque now visible on the wall, standing near the counter, arms crossed. Watch. Shaq returned the key with quiet care. Grady cocked his head. Ain't you somebody? Saw you on TV. Maybe. One of those ball players? Shaq nodded once. Used to be. Grady scratched his chin. Must be nice. All that money. Bet you never stop anywhere like this. Shaq offered a neutral smile. Not often. Grady chuckled. But it wasn't humor. It was bait. But it feels weird. Being somewhere where folks don't throw roses at your feet. Shaq kept his eyes steady. I don't need roses. Just the road. Grady leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make it private, just enough to keep it from being loud, but not enough to lose the edge. Road like this, don't forget where it comes from. Shaq held the stare for a breath longer than was comfortable, then picked up a bottle of water from the fridge and placed it on the counter. The scanner beeped. The air between them held something unsaid. Not rage. Not even hate. Just a steady hum of tension, wrapped in old pride and unspoken rules. Shaq counted out cash. Grady took it slow. Their fingers brushed slightly, brief, firm, and final. Outside, the wind picked up. A truck roared past on the highway, kicking dust into the air. Shaq stepped back into the sunlight, bottle in hand, heart a little heavier. The woman at the pump was gone now. The young man inside had vanished too. The only sound was the creak of the sign above, and the low buzz of bees near a trash bin. He didn't start the engine right away. Just sat there thinking. There hadn't been a slur, no shouting, no hands raised, but the cut had still landed. The insult had found its mark not through volume, but through weight, the kind only people who've lived long enough know how to drop. He thought about how far he'd come. How many locker rooms, how many press conferences, how many times people had said he was one of the good ones without ever questioning why there had to be ones at all. And still here at a gas station, with a rotting Coke sign and a bitter man with a broken badge, he felt it again. That quiet branding, that subtle sting that says you don't belong here. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was watching. Watching how a town carried itself. How its shadows moved even at noon. What Grady didn't know, what no one here knew, was that this wasn't the first time Shaq had been in this town. And as the dust settled on the dashboard and the air began to shift, he realized something else. This stop wasn't an accident. This place had unfinished business. And Shaq wasn't just passing through anymore. He twisted the cap off the water bottle, took a slow sip, and let the silence do the talking. Then he started the car, turned back onto the road, and drove with purpose. Behind him, the gas station grew smaller in the mirror. But what had happened there, what had been stirred, was only just beginning. He walked toward the drink fridge, scanning the labels, not because he was thirsty again, but because he felt the shift. Grady Colburn was back at the counter, now joined by two men in faded jeans and muddy boots. They leaned casually on the old display case of lotto tickets, sipping coffee from foam cups, talking in the rhythm of men who had nowhere to be and too much to say. Their voices lowered when Shaq stepped past, but the tension rose like a tide. One of them chuckled under his breath. The kind of laugh that wasn't from humor. It was the sound of someone waiting for a reaction. Grady raised his voice just enough to carry. You know, back in the day we had weight limits on public facilities. You break a seat, you bought it. The man beside him barked out a laugh, nearly spilling his coffee. Shaq paused, hand on a bottle of Gatorade, his back still to them. Man like that ought to be using livestock troughs. Grady continued, casually now, like he was reminiscing about good old days that didn't deserve the nostalgia. Bet the plumbing's still screaming. Shaq turned slowly, expression unreadable, gaze sweeping the store. The young woman stocking shelves near the window dropped her eyes immediately, pretending to sort candy bars. An elderly man picking up smokes froze in place, his mouth caught in mid-motion like he couldn't decide whether to speak or just watch it play out. Everyone heard it. No one said a word. He walked to the counter. The Gatorade set down with deliberate care. Grady didn't flinch, only smirked wider, eyes gleaming like he'd won something invisible. I get it, Grady said, loud enough now that everyone in the store could hear. You're used to VIP lounges and private jets. Probably forgot what regular life looks like. Forgot how we do things down here. Shaq looked at him, quiet and centered. He didn't blink, didn't speak, just studied the man like one studies a puzzle with missing pieces. Grady leaned in, elbows on the counter. But see here? We've got rules. You don't just walk into a man's store, use his facilities, and expect to be treated like royalty. You ain't special here. The pause that followed felt like it stretched time itself. The buzz of the cooler compressor. The shuffle of someone's boots on tile. A cough from the back. The air felt tight, electric, like something was about to snap. But it didn't. Not from Instead, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a bill, placed it gently next to the drink, and looked Grady in the eye. Didn't ask to be treated special, he said, voice low, measured. Just ask to be treated human. It wasn't a comeback. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. But in a place like this, reminders could be more dangerous than fists. Grady scoffed, picking up the bill like it was dirt. Look at you, all righteous now. Must be hard coming down from the clouds to walk with us mortals. One of the other men piped in. I thought giants were supposed to be mythical. Didn't think they used the same Johns we did. They laughed. That awful kind of laughter that turns the mundane into mockery. That tries to shrink what it can't understand. It rolled through the store like smoke, wrapping around the silence of the others. Not one voice rose in protest. Not one face turned toward Grady with shame. They just watched, passive spectators to a humiliation dressed as humor. Shaq looked around the room. His eyes moved from face to face, memorizing the silence. He didn't need to say anything. Their lack of protest said enough. He'd been in arenas louder than bombs. He'd felt the tremble of crowds chant his name like a drumbeat of war. But this silence? This was something deeper. Something crueler. The quiet of people who chose safety over justice. Who swallowed the lump in their throat instead of raising a voice. And that silence had weight. You know, Grady said, sipping from his mug, folks around here respect humility. You don't come in here acting like you owned the place. I didn't, Shaq replied calmly. I came in to take a piss and buy a drink. Grady's eyes narrowed. Funny how people like you always think they can rewrite the story. Shaq stared at him, and something flickered across his face. Not anger, not even disappointment, just understanding. The kind of understanding that comes when you realize a man's not fighting you. He's fighting ghosts you didn't create. He took his change without another word, bottle in hand, and turned to leave. But Grady wasn't done. You know, he called out, louder now, making sure the whole room caught it. You might have made it big, but you'll always be what you started as. Money don't change blood. A hush fell. The kind that doesn't come from shock but shame. Shaq stopped just inside the doorway. He didn't turn around. In his mind, he saw himself as a boy. 10 years old. Walking into a store with his mother. Watching her get followed down every aisle. Watching her pretend not to notice. Watching her pay with exact change. So no one could accuse her of theft. Watching her dignity bleed. Drop by drop with every fake smile she gave in return. He remembered what she told him then. We don't fight fire with fire. But we don't forget where the flames come from. And he hadn't forgotten. He stepped out into the sun, which now felt hotter, more alive. The weight of that store followed him, not on his back, but in his chest. He took a long breath, twisted the cap off the bottle, and drank. The water was cold, but it didn't cool the heat rising beneath his skin. Across the lot, a young woman in a blue shirt was watching from her car, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met. She looked away. He climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine roared to life, but he didn't shift into gear. He sat there, letting it soak in. The shame wasn't his. The jokes weren't about him. They were about what he represented. Change, power, presence. And for men like Grady, that presence was a threat. Not because Shaq had done anything wrong, but because he dared to exist where they didn't want him to. He didn't fight them, didn't yell, didn't raise a hand or a voice. But he stood, and sometimes standing was the most dangerous thing you could do. He pulled out slowly, gravel crunching beneath the tires. He didn't speed away. He wanted them to watch, to see that they hadn't broken anything, that he was still here, still whole. Back on the road, the trees blurred past again. But the air had changed. Something had cracked open in that town, and even if no one inside that store would say it aloud, they'd remember the moment they watched a man carry their ugliness with grace. The moment they realized their laughter couldn't bend him. He gripped the wheel tighter, not with rage, but purpose. He wasn't done here. There was more to this town than that store, and something, deep down, told him the worst was still hiding, waiting to be seen. The tires had barely begun to roll when Shaq saw her, just a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, like a memory suddenly made flesh. The car was idling at the edge of the lot, his fingers resting on the shifter, when the gas station door swung open, and out walked a woman balancing 2 coffee cups in one hand and an oversized purse in the other. She moved with the kind of tension people develop when they're trying not to be noticed, but know they already have been. She didn't look at him at first, just kept her chin tucked, her stride brisk and narrow as she made her way toward a sun-faded pickup truck parked 2 rows over. But as she passed the front of Shaq's SUV, she glanced up for the briefest second. Her eyes met his. That's when it happened. The coffee cup in her left hand trembled, then tumbled. The lid popped off as it hit the pavement, sending a dark stream of bitter liquid crawling toward the gravel. She froze. Her face shifted, not in pain, not even in surprise, but recognition. A heavy kind. The kind that comes not from celebrity, but from memory. Her hand went instinctively to her chest, pressing down like she was trying to keep her heart from escaping her body. Shaq stepped out of the car, calm and casual, as if he hadn't just been mocked to his face minutes ago by a man stuck in a decade that needed to be buried. He moved toward her, slowly, hands open, saying nothing. The breeze played with the edge of her long beige cardigan, fluttering it like pages in a book waiting to be read. She bent down to grab the cup, shaking her head softly, not at him, but at herself. "Damn lids," she muttered, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. She straightened up, and for a second, it seemed like that was all it was going to be, an awkward, clumsy moment in a parking lot. But then her voice changed, lowered, tightened. "I know who you are." Shaq tilted his head slightly, non-committal. "Do you?" She looked around, as if checking for ears, and took a small step closer. "Not just from the games," she said. "Not from the sneakers, not the commercials. I mean, I know you." He searched her face now, really looked. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, though the lines around her mouth suggested she'd lived longer than that in emotional years. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail streaked with silver, and her name tag half covered by her sweater read L. Bishop. Shaq nodded slowly. "Lana," he said, testing the name like a key in an old lock. She breathed in sharp, like he'd reached into her memory, without permission. "So you do remember." "Pieces," he said. "Fragments." "I was 16, she whispered. "You were taller than anyone I'd ever seen in real life. Quiet, so quiet." Shaq remembered now. Not all of it, but the shape of it. A younger version of himself, left behind in a town that didn't have space for outsiders, especially not ones like him. A night when he'd been stranded after a scrimmage in a nearby county. A rainstorm, a locked door, a woman, no, a girl on a porch, with a flashlight and a heart too big for her surroundings. "I didn't know what else to do," she said. "My mama, she made me let you in. Told me not to listen to what folks around here say. Told me if a man's in need, you help him. Didn't matter what he looked like. She gave you dry socks and a blanket." Shaq nodded. "I remember the blanket. She got hell for that. Weeks after, from Grady, from his people. Shaq narrowed his eyes. Grady Colburn was sheriff then. Acting, she said. His daddy retired that spring. Grady had just taken over. All ego. No badge yet. But he had friends. People who'd do what he said without question. Shaq's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Barely visible unless you knew what to look for. They made a scene? Worse, Lana said. They made a warning. They didn't want you coming back. They didn't want her kindness to spread. Next week, someone threw bricks through our front window. My mama never flinched. Said truth costs, but it's the only currency that lasts. A silence settled between them. The sun was higher now, throwing long shadows beneath the cars, and stretching time in ways that made it feel slower, heavier. Lana bent to grab the coffee cup again, though it was already empty. Just habit now. I saw you on the news last month, she said. You were giving away shoes in Detroit, helping families with no rent, feeding people. And I thought, he still remembers, still carries it all. And I wondered if you'd ever come back here. Guess I got my answer. Shaq looked past her for a moment, to the road beyond the trees. Didn't mean to, he said. Didn't even realize where I was till I got out of the car.
That's how it works, she said.
This place, it draws you in when it's time. She stepped closer now, voice dropping further, until it was a whisper barely above the breeze. This town owes you more than it knows. Shaq met her gaze, steady and firm. Why do I feel like there's more to that than you're saying? There is, she admitted, her fingers trembling slightly as they wiped at the spilled coffee on her jeans. But I can't be the one to tell it. Not all of it. Some things you have to see for yourself. Some truths have to be walked through. Shaq didn't press. He didn't need to. The weight in her eyes, the crack in her voice, he'd heard it before, in locker rooms, in quiet hallways, after games, in mothers who'd lost sons and sons who'd buried truths. This wasn't a conversation. It was a doorway. I work at the library now, she said, suddenly awkward, like she'd just realized how exposed she'd become. Monday to Thursday. It's quiet, safe. No one's asking questions there. He nodded, filing it away not just as a detail, but as a breadcrumb. She gave him one last look, then moved toward her truck, tossing the ruined cup into a nearby trash bin. As she opened the door, she paused and turned. It wasn't an accident. You being here. You being back. You think it's just about what happened today? With Grady? She shook her head slowly. No, Shaq. It started a long time ago. Something's been waiting, and it's waking up now. Then she climbed in and drove off, the rumble of her truck fading into the warm wind, leaving Shaq standing in the middle of a parking lot soaked in echoes. He stood there for a long while, bottle still in hand, the taste of that cryptic warning settling into his thoughts like dust in sunlight. Every inch of this place felt heavier now, like the ground itself held memory, like the town had been holding its breath since the last time he left. And something in him knew deep, narrow deep, that what had happened in that gas station was only the surface. There were roots buried here, deep ones, and it was time to start digging. Reese Colburn hadn't moved much during the entire exchange between his father and Shaq. 18, maybe 19, tall but not filled out, with the gangly unease of someone still figuring out where their limbs belonged. He wore a red cap turned backward, a name tag pinned crookedly to his polo, and a nervous energy that seeped through his every motion, whether it was wiping the counter too many times, or pretending to be focused on the register that didn't even have a customer. His eyes, though, were laser-focused on every word, every breath exchanged between Shaq and his father. When Shaq walked out, the silence inside didn't relax. If anything, it thickened. Grady muttered something about entitled giants, and kids these days with phones in their hands and no sense of history. But Reese wasn't listening. He was staring at the empty space where Shaq had stood, jaw clenched, thumb tapping a twitchy rhythm against the side of the register. Minutes passed. Then Grady barked for a restock of the motor oil shelf, and Reese obeyed with the kind of automatic compliance that came from years of learned submission. But his mind wasn't on the job. It was still replaying the moment Shaq had stared down his father, not with fury but with something more unsettling, something heavier. It had looked like grace, but it landed like judgment. And Reese had felt it. By the time his shift ended, the sun had started its descent, casting long amber streaks across the parking lot. Shaq hadn't left. He was leaning against the hood of his SUV, water bottle in hand, eyes scanning the trees like he was listening to them. Reese hesitated before stepping outside, heart thumping like sneakers on a gym floor. He didn't know what he was going to say, only that he needed to. Shaq glanced up as Reese approached. No words, just a nod of acknowledgement. He could tell the boy was carrying something. Reese shoved his hands into his pockets, rocking on his heels like a child trying to stand tall in shoes too big. Hey, he mumbled. He paused, looking at the gravel, then back up. My dad, he ain't always like that. Shaq raised an eyebrow, the kind of look that invites truth without demanding it. Reese rushed to fill the silence. I mean, he is, but not all the time. He just gets worked up. The store, the town, all the stuff that's changed. He says things, you know. Shaq didn't move, just studied the boy's posture, his shifting feet, his darting eyes. He knew rehearsed lines when he heard them. This wasn't a spontaneous apology. It was survival. The kind of words kids use when they've grown up watching the adults. They love break people in small, practiced ways. You scared of him? Shaq asked, not accusatory, just calm. Reese's eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly.
No.
I mean, no, not like that. He's been through a lot. Lost his badge. Lost people. Says the world turned on him and left him behind. Shaq nodded slowly. And you believe that? Reese hesitated longer this time. The pause said more than any answer might have. I don't know what I believe, he finally said. I know what he tells me. I know what I see. They don't match up. There it was. The crack in the surface. The place where truth had begun leaking in. Shaq pushed off the SUV, standing tall beside the kid. His voice was low, steady. You saw what happened in there? Reese nodded. You think that was right? Reese didn't answer immediately. Then no. Shaq let the moment stretch. Let the silence draw out the truth. What else you seen in that place? Reese stiffened. What do you mean? Shaq tilted his head. I think you know. Reese swallowed hard. The breeze picked up, kicking dust at their feet. A crow called out from a nearby pine like it was eavesdropping. Reese looked away. There's a camera in the store, he said suddenly. Not the one above the door. There's a second one, hidden, up in the vent. It records everything. Dad had it put in after the shelves got robbed last year. He says it's for insurance, but I think he just likes knowing everything. Shaq's expression didn't change, but inside a gear shifted. I saw the footage from today, Reese added. He kept watching it, rewinding it, laughing. The boy's voice cracked. He called you names. I didn't even know people still said out loud. Shaq exhaled slowly. And you? I downloaded the clip, Reese confessed, eyes down. Sent it to someone. I don't even know why. Maybe to prove I'm not like him. Maybe to prove I still have a soul. Shaq didn't flinch. Who'd you send it to? Reese shrugged. An old teacher, Mrs. Dobson. She runs a community page, posts about racial equity, town history, that kind of stuff. I figured if anyone knew what to do, it'd be her. Shaq looked out toward the highway again. That clip goes public. It's gonna set fire to this town. Reese nodded. Maybe it should. They stood in silence for a moment, just the two of them beneath a widening sky. The sun was sinking fast now, bleeding orange into the tree line. Shadows lengthened. You ever think about leaving? Shaq asked. Reese didn't even wait a beat. Every day. Shaq nodded. Then why haven't you? Reese took a long breath. Because if I go, he wins. This town stays the same. Nobody learns. Nobody changes. Shaq looked at him, seeing something deeper now. Not just fear, but resolve. A spark in a place full of ashes. You're not him, Shaq said quietly. I know, Reese whispered. But he raised me. That counts for something, doesn't it? Shaq thought about that for a long moment. It does, but it doesn't define you. Not unless you let it. Reese looked up at him, something between shame and hope flickering in his eyes. What now? Shaq turned toward the road. Now we wait. If that footage gets out, this place is gonna come apart. People are gonna choose sides. You ready for that? Reese didn't answer right away. Then, with more steel than before, yeah, I think I am. Shaq studied him one last time, then offered his hand. Reese hesitated, then shook it. I'll be around, Shaq said. Then he stepped back into his SUV, engine rumbling to life once again. As he pulled away, Reese stood in the same spot, watching, the boy behind the counter. No longer invisible, no longer just a bystander. Something had changed, and the town didn't even know it yet. The road looked different at night. It always had. During the day, the cracks in the pavement, the half-forgotten signs, and the heavy branches of leaning trees gave it a tired, aging familiarity. But at night, that same road whispered something else, something deeper. It carried memories that didn't die when the sun went down. And as Shaq drove through that winding stretch again, headlights sweeping across shadows that never quite retreated, he found himself pulled into a night that had never truly ended. 25 years ago, he'd been here. Not as Big Shaq, not as the legend, the millionaire, the icon, just a lanky 18-year-old, with aching legs, a duffel bag, and a busted ride after a regional tournament. The team van had dropped him near the edge of town where his uncle was supposed to pick him up, but a last-minute delay left him stranded. The sun had already dipped below the trees when he started walking toward the gas station with a full bladder and sore feet. The first place he stopped, a roadside diner with neon lights flickering like Morse code, had locked their doors early. The woman inside mouthed, closed even as she wiped down a booth that didn't need wiping. The second, a drugstore with faded pharmacy signage, claimed the restroom was out of order, though he could hear the flush inside when another customer exited. By the third rejection, it wasn't just about needing a bathroom. It was about something else. Something more humiliating than urgent. Each no wasn't just logistical. It was a judgment, a decision made with a glance, and sealed with an excuse. He'd finally ended up on a quiet residential street with only porch lights and the occasional dog bark to keep him company. The town felt like it had gone to sleep with one eye open. That's when he saw the house. Small, white-paneled, with a wraparound porch and wind chimes that sang in a sad, fluttering melody. He hesitated before stepping onto the porch. Not because he was scared, but because he'd learned that people feared him before he even opened his mouth. His size, his skin, his silence, they always filled in the blanks wrong. Then the door opened before he could even knock. A woman stood there, gray hair tied back, floral housecoat buttoned to the neck, and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and forgiven most of it. "You need help?" she asked, not afraid, not angry, just certain. Shaq, too stunned to overthink it, nodded. "Bathroom," he managed. She stepped aside immediately. "Come on in. Don't track mud, though." Her name was Dolores Bishop, and that house smelled like vanilla, lemon polish, and something stewing low on a back burner. The bathroom was small but clean, decorated with lace doilies and a fading calendar from 3 years earlier. When he came out, Dolores had set a glass of lemonade on the table and a towel beside it. "You walkin' far?" she asked. "Just waitin' on a ride. You look like you've been running," she replied, eyeing his sweat-soaked collar. He laughed. "Just once. Kinda feels that way." That was the first time he sat down in that house, and it wouldn't be the last. Dolores didn't press him with questions. She didn't ask for credentials or proof of innocence. She just watched him with those tired but soft eyes, and told him he could wait as long as he needed. And so he stayed a while. But the town noticed. From the front window, Shaq saw shadows gathering, men standing on porches, murmuring into phones, shifting like they were waiting for something. Dolores didn't seem surprised. She closed the curtains, said nothing. Later that night, the phone rang. Dolores answered, spoke quietly, hung up, then sighed long and low like she'd just dropped 100 pounds onto her lungs. "That was Deputy Grady," she said. "Said I've got no business taking in strangers. Told me there'd be consequences." Shaq stiffened. "I can go." She shook her head. "You're not the problem here. Their fear is." He remembered those words more clearly than anything else that night. But something happened after he left. Shaq's uncle finally arrived around 11 p.m., headlights slicing through the dark like salvation. Dolores handed him a wrapped slice of pound cake and told him to keep walking tall. He thanked her, climbed in, and left. But the next morning, news trickled back. Someone had thrown bricks through Dolores Bishop's windows, smeared slurs across her mailbox in red paint, left a pile of animal waste on her front steps. No arrests were made, no reports were filed. It was just boys being boys. A misunderstanding. No one saw anything. But Shaq had heard stories for weeks after. Dolores stopped coming to church. Lana started walking to school alone. The Bishop family name, once synonymous with grace and strength, was dragged through whispers and warning glances. And just like that, a kind act was rewritten as a betrayal. A line crossed. Back in the present, Shaq pulled off the road and parked near a rusted wire fence. moonlight slicing the trees into silver shadows. He stepped out and walked toward where he remembered the Bishop house used to stand. It was gone now. The porch, the wind chimes, the soft light spilling from the kitchen window replaced by an empty plot, overgrown with weeds and silence. But the memory remained. He stood there not moving, just breathing in the past like it still had scent and sound. The truth was, he'd buried that night. Not because it wasn't important, but because it hurt too much to carry. He'd thanked Dolores with his words, but never with action. He never wrote, never visited, just moved on, trying to believe that moment had been a fluke, an ugly exception in an otherwise forward-moving world. But it wasn't, and now, it was crawling back to him. He heard a twig snap behind him. Turned. Lana stood there, arms folded tight against her chest, jacket zipped up to her chin. She didn't speak right away, just looked at the space where the house had once lived. She stayed after it happened, Lana said. Said she wasn't going to be pushed out of her own home. But she never opened the door to strangers again. Not once. Shaq nodded, his throat thick. She never blamed you, Lana added, turning toward him. But she knew what it cost. She used to say, being kind ain't free, but it's worth every penny. They stood in silence. Then Shaq asked the question he hadn't let himself consider until now. Was Grady behind it? Lana's jaw clenched. He never said it, never admitted it. But everyone knew. He'd just gotten a taste of power, and Mama's kindness embarrassed him. Made him look weak. That was enough. Shaq exhaled, staring at the soil beneath his feet. She kept a letter, Lana continued. Wrote it the night you left. Said if anything ever happened to her, someone needed to know the truth. I found it after she passed. It mentions you. It names names, including Grady. Shaq looked up, surprised. I haven't told anyone, she said. I didn't think anyone would care. Until today. Until you came back. He took that in slowly, letting it sink past skin and bone, into the marrow of who he'd become. This wasn't just a visit. This was a reckoning. The past hadn't forgotten. And now, neither could he. You think this town's ready for the truth? He asked. Lana shrugged. Truth doesn't wait for permission. Shaq nodded. The breeze rustled through the weeds, stirring up the scent of pine, soil, and the faint memory of lemon polish. A storm was coming. Not the kind that rattled trees, but the kind that peeled away decades of silence, one truth at a time. And Shaq, he was done running from it. It was the kind of silence that only comes before a storm, not the physical kind that tears through rooftops and breaks trees in half, but the kind that seeps into a place's spirit and changes the way people look at each other. The kind that arrives not with thunder but with truth that can't be put back in the bottle once it's out. That silence hung over Colburn's corner as the sun rose on the edge of a town that had gone to bed, comfortable, and was waking up exposed. Shaq was already awake. He hadn't slept much. Instead, he had sat in the same SUV he'd nearly driven away in twice before, watching as the horizon bled orange and pink across the sky. His phone buzzed once, then again, and then didn't stop. He didn't look right away. He already had a feeling what it was about. Across town, in a small white house with half-shuttered blinds and a Wi-Fi router barely clinging to signal, Reese Colburn sat hunched over his laptop. His thumb hovered over the screen of his phone, eyes bouncing between browser tabs, Twitter threads, and his own DMs, which were now lighting up like wildfire. The night before, he had sent the hidden security footage to Miss Dobson, his old civics teacher who'd moved to Atlanta but still ran a public community account. She'd posted it after confirming it wasn't altered. Then she'd gone to bed. What neither of them expected was what happened next. By 6 a.m. it had hit 40,000 shares. By 7 a.m., a major news outlet had picked it up. By 8 a.m., satellite vans were rolling into town. The video was grainy but clear. The hidden camera tucked inside the corner vent had caught every second of Grady Colburn's mocking tone. His backhanded jokes, the racially laced jabs, and Shaq's silent restraint. You could hear the discomfort in the room, see the shift in bystanders' posture, witness the uneasy silence that blanketed the room as a famous black man was reduced, not to a criminal, not to a threat, but to something even worse in the eyes of those who feared change. A mirror. By 9 a.m., Grady was standing outside the gas station, arms crossed, flanked by two friends and local councilman, Darren Fleet, trying to do damage control. Reporters had gathered in a tight half-circle, microphones extended like weapons. It's a misunderstanding, Grady said, adjusting his collar. Just a joke. I treat every customer the same. This cancel culture stuff, it's out of control. They're trying to paint me as something I'm not. The sound bites were sharp, carefully chosen. He was leaning into every buzzword he thought would shield him. He denied racism, accused the media of twisting the truth, said the video lacked context. He tried to shift focus to Shaq's fame, suggested maybe he was trying to stir controversy for attention, or worse for money. But no one was buying it. Not this time, because Shaq hadn't said a word. No tweets, no press conference, no dramatic rebuttal, just silence. And that silence was louder than anything Grady could manufacture. From inside his SUV, parked a block away, Shaq watched it all unfold on his screen. Lana had texted earlier that morning, just 3 words, "It's happening now." He knew what she meant. The floodgates weren't cracking anymore. They'd been torn open. The moral dilemma twisted quietly in his chest. He wasn't a man of revenge, never had been. He didn't carry hate, but he carried truth. And this town, this moment, had waited long enough for truth to walk through the front door and refuse to leave. He pulled into the edge of the lot just as another reporter went live. And in a developing story, viral footage from inside this gas station appears to show a former law enforcement officer mocking NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal with racially charged comments. Shaq remained inside the car, shades on, watching. A crowd had formed. Not just media, but townspeople. People who'd grown up here, shopped here, filled their tanks, and paid their dues under the same flickering Coca-Cola sign for years. And now they were watching their corner store become a battleground between memory and accountability. Back near the building, Reese stepped out slowly, nervous. He hadn't seen his father yet. The man had called him twice already, that morning, both calls short and filled with a kind of restrained fury he hadn't heard in years. Reese had let them go to voicemail. Now he stood at the edge of the crowd, unsure whether to speak or run. But then he saw Shaq, not moving, just there, present like a mountain. And in that moment, Reese understood what needed to happen. He stepped forward. People turned. Phones rose. And Reese spoke not to the cameras, not to his father, but to the crowd. "My name is Reese Colburn," he said, voice trembling but steady enough. "I work here. I've worked here since I was 15. And what you saw in that video, that wasn't a misunderstanding. That was my father. That's the man I've lived with. That's the man I've heard say things that don't belong in this century, let alone in this town." Gasps. Murmurs. Reese continued, eyes flicking once to Shaq, who gave a subtle nod. "I didn't post that video to destroy him. I posted it because I've seen too many people stay quiet. I've stayed quiet. But that silence makes you part of it, and I'm not okay with that anymore." The weight of those words settled across the crowd. Grady pushed forward, his face red and lips drawn thin. "You think you know better than your own blood?" he snapped. "You think selling your own father out makes you a hero?" Reese didn't flinch. "It doesn't make me a hero. It just makes me someone who's tired of pretending it's not happening." There it was. The first real break in the town's mask. People started talking, not in whispers, but aloud. Conversations sparked. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded, recognizing their own complicity and their stillness. And through it all, Shaq didn't move, because he didn't need to. His silence had done more than 1,000 arguments ever could. The internet had already moved the needle. But this moment, this witnessing was what mattered most. The confrontation not just with one man, but with a culture, a legacy, a truth buried under politeness and denial. Later that night, back in the quiet of Lana's office at the library, Shaq sat with her and Reese. The door was closed. The lights were low. On the table between them lay Dolores Bishop's letter, now unfolded and annotated. Its ink faded but its message sharp. "She was right," Shaq said. "Truth does cost. But it lasts," Lana whispered. Reese stared at the letter, then at Shaq. "Did I do the right thing?" Shaq didn't answer immediately. Instead he leaned forward, hands folded, gaze deep. "You didn't do it to your father," he said. "You did it for this town." The silence that followed wasn't the tense kind. It was peaceful. Still. The kind that comes when the first piece of rot is finally cut away, and healing, however slow, finally has room to begin. Outside, the news vans rolled out, their job done for now. But inside, the real story, the real reckoning, was still unfolding. That night, it wasn't just about helping someone. It was about choosing a side. And I chose his. I'd do it again, even knowing what came next. They came after he left. Not with torches, not with fists, but with threats. Rocks through the windows, paint on the steps, calls in the middle of the night. I recognized the truck that drove past slow, over and over again. It belonged to Grady Colburn, and he wasn't alone. Darren Fleet, Lyle Whitaker, Calvin Dorsey. They called themselves a neighborhood watch, but it was never about safety. It was about control. They weren't just angry. I let a black boy in my house. They were angry. I made them see him as human. I never filed a report. I knew better. The sheriff's office was the threat. But I wrote it down, because truth matters, even if it waits for someone braver than me to carry it forward. Be ready, baby. One day, this town's gonna need you to remember. Mama. Lana didn't realize she was crying until she felt the warmth trail down her cheeks, landing on the paper, the ink untouched but the silence finally broken. Her breath hitched, not just from the weight of her mother's words, but from the sudden clarity that came with them. It wasn't just about what happened to Shaq. It never had been. That night, when Lana watched her mother close the curtains and sit beside a stranger, she hadn't known what was happening beyond the comfort of her walls. She hadn't known that down the street, the bishop name was being crossed off the church registry, or that whispers were being planted like weeds in town meetings, in grocery store lines, in the pews on Sunday mornings. Her mother didn't fight them publicly. She didn't scream. She just kept walking tall, carrying a truth they were too afraid to name. And now that truth was in Lana's hands. Downstairs, her phone buzzed again. Messages from reporters, from Reese, even from Mrs. Dobson. The town was in full reckoning now, and Lana was no longer just a daughter holding a letter. She was holding a match. She stepped out of the attic with a new steadiness in her bones. Outside, the day was already warming. People moved in small clusters, neighbors talking in driveways, whispers traded over fences. Colburn's corner was quiet, but not with peace. It was the quiet of a community realizing its mirror had been turned around. Lana drove to the library, with the letter in a plastic sleeve, tucked in a manila folder, between two blank pages, like it needed time to breathe. She didn't call Shaq. She didn't have to. He was already waiting, sitting in the reading nook like he'd always belonged there, too big for the chair, too quiet for the moment, but perfectly still. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened, and for a brief second, his eyes shimmered. But he didn't let the emotion spill. He simply exhaled, folded the paper carefully, and nodded. She protected me, he said softly. Even after I left. Lana nodded. She protected us both. For a long moment they said nothing. Just sat in the hush of old books and new reckonings. She named them, he said finally. Grady. Fleet. Dorsey. She wasn't the only one they tried to scare, Lana added. 3 weeks later they cornered the Whitaker boy outside the barber shop. He'd defended my mom on Main Street. They put him in the hospital and said it was a robbery. No one was arrested. Shaq looked at her. How long have you been carrying that? Too long, she replied. But the letter wasn't just memory. It was evidence. Shaq reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. Flipping to the first empty page, he wrote down every name, every date, every phrase that mattered. Lana watched his handwriting shape the words into something bigger than either of them. I'm not here to destroy this town, he said. But I'm not leaving it the same. I don't think it can stay the same, Lana said. Not anymore. Later that evening, they scanned the letter, archived it, and emailed it to a local journalist who had been covering the story with more empathy than most. Then they made 3 physical copies and stored them in separate places, because the truth didn't just need to be told. It needed to be protected. That night, when Shaq stepped outside into the cooling air, he looked up at the stars. The sky felt wider here, and for the first time in a long time, the weight in his chest wasn't just from history. It was from the momentum of something beginning. The past was no longer buried. It had risen, letter by letter, and it had a name. The chairs were set up in a wide semicircle inside the old community center just off Main Street, the one with the faded blue roof and hand-painted sign that read "Welcome All." Once used for potlucks, bingo nights, and the occasional blood drive, the room had seen a decline in recent years, much like the town itself. But tonight it was filled to the edges, not with celebration, not with protest, but with something rarer: anticipation. Shaq stood near the front, hands clasped in front of him, eyes calm but unreadable. He wasn't on a stage, He'd insisted there wouldn't be one. Just a single mic stand set level with the front row. No elevation, no spotlight. He wanted to be eye to eye with every person who came. If they were going to look at him, he wanted them to really see him. Outside, the air was thick with that southern tension that floats when something big is about to happen. Families filtered in quietly. Some clutching folded lawn chairs, others holding arms, eyes cautious but curious. Reporters had gathered near the back wall, lenses pointed but not intruding, unsure whether this was news or history in the making. Lana stood near the side, holding a printed copy of her mother's letter in a protective sleeve. Reese sat in the second row, shoulders tight, knees bouncing slightly, caught between nerves and resolve. The seat beside him, meant for Grady, remained empty. Shaq stepped up to the mic as the room settled into a fragile stillness. He scanned the crowd, letting his gaze move slowly across the faces. Some familiar, most not. Then he spoke, and his voice didn't fill the room with force. It grounded it with truth. I came here because I had to use the bathroom. There were a few half-smiles, mostly from younger faces in the crowd, but no one laughed. That's how it started, Shaq continued. A simple human need. And what followed wasn't new. Wasn't surprising. Wasn't even the worst I've faced. But it reminded me that comfort doesn't always mean progress. That silence doesn't mean healing. That just because something isn't being said, doesn't mean it isn't still being felt. He paused, his breath controlled, his hands still steady. You all saw the video. I don't need to tell you what happened. You know what you heard, what you watched, what you maybe ignored once before in other ways, with other people. There was a murmur, soft and ashamed. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm not here to punish. I'm here because something broke open, and I think it's time we stop pretending it wasn't already cracked. He gestured gently toward Reese. Someone made a choice to break the cycle. That choice wasn't easy, and the fallout hasn't been fair. But it was necessary. Reese stood slowly, his face pale but firm, and stepped up to the front. Shaq moved aside, offering the mic without words. Reese took it with both hands, the letter shaking slightly as he unfolded it. I'm not good at speeches, Reese began, his voice quiet, raw. But this isn't mine, it's my grandmother's. She wrote it the night Shaquille O'Neal stayed in her house, when she gave kindness instead of fear, and paid for it. He read each word, line by line, as he spoke Dolores Bishop's truth into the space. Something in the room shifted. People leaned in, tears welled. Nods passed between neighbors who hadn't looked each other in the eyes in years. By the time he reached the end, be ready, baby. One day, this town's going to need you to remember. The room had fallen completely silent. No camera clicks, no whispers, just the sound of a community realizing it had lost something precious long ago, and had a chance to get it back. Shaq returned to the mic, but this time his voice faltered. I never cried that night, he said, eyes glassing over. Not when they turned me away. Not when the bricks hit her window. Not when I left. I told myself I couldn't cry, because that's what they expected, because tears meant weakness, and weakness meant they won. He paused, swallowed hard. But I was wrong. And then, it happened. His voice cracked. His shoulders dipped. A single tear rolled down his cheek, slow and unhidden. He didn't wipe it away. I was wrong to believe silence was strength, he said. I was wrong to think moving on meant moving past. I was wrong to leave this place behind without ever coming back to say, I remember. The crowd was stunned, not by the words, but by the vulnerability. The man who had been larger than life, literally and figuratively, was standing there before them, not asking for sympathy, not demanding justice, but offering truth. And somehow, that was more powerful. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't empty. It was full. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. A single pair of hands from the back row, then another, and another, until the room was filled with applause, not the wild concert-style cheer of adoration, but the steady rhythm of recognition, of gratitude, of release. It wasn't about Shaq. It wasn't about Grady. It wasn't even just about Dolores. It was about all of them. The shift wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Even outside, where Grady stood by his truck, arms folded, watching from a distance, you could see the moment his grip on the town loosened. People who once nodded at him in grocery stores, now walked past him without acknowledgement. A neighbor who had always voted with him on city council crossed the street without a glance. He wasn't being shouted down, he was being outgrown. Shaq didn't linger in the afterglow. He spoke to a few community members, hugged Reese, touched Lana's shoulder gently in thanks. Then he stepped out into the twilight, alone. He didn't need a headline. He didn't need a parade. He'd come not to burn anything down, but to lay something to rest, and plant something better in its place. And that, more than rage, more than revenge, was what real reckoning looked like. It had been 7 months since the town hall. 7 months since silence was broken. Since eyes opened wider than they had in generations. Some things moved slowly. Healing always does. But some things had shifted fast. The demolition of the gas station had drawn protests at first, from a few loyal to history for all the wrong reasons. But time passed, and truth, when named aloud, has a way of making resistance look small. Shaq hadn't come back with cameras or speeches. He came quietly, with blueprints and contractors. He didn't fund the center for show. He did it because something in him had finally found stillness in movement. Something in the act of rebuilding that gave peace a pulse. Now the community center was alive with voices. Small ones, learning to read at the children's table. Old ones, meeting for morning coffee beneath a wall of black and white photographs. And teaching voices like Lana's, whose class on local history had tripled in attendance after she hung her mother's letter on the wall beside the entrance. Reese was there too. Not just working, but leading. He wore a staff badge now, but he didn't need one. Everyone knew him. He ran the place like it was a second chance he'd decided to take with both hands. There was no smugness in his posture, just purpose. He managed the events calendar, organized volunteer shifts, kept the books balanced, and quietly made sure the pantry in the back was always stocked for whoever needed it. On the outside wall of the new restroom, just beside the gleaming steel door, was a plaque etched in bronze. Every man deserves dignity. People stopped to read it. Some took pictures, others simply nodded. No one laughed. Shaq returned often, but not to oversee, to sit, to listen. Sometimes he swept the entryway before the doors opened. Sometimes he played chess with a retired history teacher near the window. Sometimes he just stood outside in the sun, watching as the town moved around the space with new rhythm, new rituals. One spring afternoon, Lana stepped outside with 2 cups of lemonade, one in each hand. Shaq was sitting on the bench beneath the magnolia tree he'd insisted they plant at the edge of the lot. It was just starting to bloom, fat white petals opening like whispers. "You know she'd hate this," Lana said with a smile, handing him a cup. Shaq looked up, smirking. "Dolores?" Lana nodded. All this attention. Her name on a building. She didn't want credit. Shaq said, "Just change." Lana sipped her drink, then looked toward the horizon, where a group of local kids rode past on bikes, their voices trailing in laughter. "She used to tell me towns only grow when they start remembering instead of forgetting." He nodded. She knew. Reese stepped out the front door then, clipboard in hand, already mid-call. "Yeah, we've got space for the workshop next Thursday," he said into the phone. "Just email me the flyer. And hey, make sure it's inclusive this time. We had complaints last month." Shaq chuckled. Kids turned into a manager. Lana raised an eyebrow. He turned into a man. Shaq leaned back, letting the sunlight warm his face, the wind carrying soft snippets of music from inside, where a local band was rehearsing for the open mic night. There was no sign marking this day as special, no ribbon cutting, no spotlight, just breath, just present. "I thought I was done," Shaq said after a long silence. "Thought my job was to show up, tell the truth, leave. I didn't expect to feel tethered." Lana tilted her head. "You're not here because you owe something. You're here because this place became part of you. And maybe now, finally, it gets to be the good part." They sat for a while, listening. A breeze passed through the magnolia tree, shedding a single white petal that landed softly near Shaq's foot. "You ever think about what might have happened if your mom hadn't opened the door?" he asked. Lana's face grew still, her lips pressing into a line. "All the time." Shaq looked down at the petal. "Me too." Inside, one of the volunteers, a high school senior named Devante, was setting up folding chairs for the evening's film screening. Beside the projection screen hung a framed photograph of Dolores Bishop, standing on her porch, her eyes full of something beyond defiance, something eternal. "She told me something once," Lana said. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. Shaq turned to her. Waiting. She said. Sometimes the loudest answers come from the quietest rooms. He exhaled slowly, the words settling in like roots. She wasn't talking about prayer, he asked. Maybe, Lana said. Or maybe about rooms like this one. About change that doesn't need to roar to be real. Reese stepped outside again, now free of the phone, and joined them beneath the tree. Next week's booked solid, he said, proud but tired. Food drive. Health screening. Veteran story hour. We're getting calls from towns 30 miles out wanting to come in. That's because this place feels different, Lana said. Shaq nodded. It feels right. The three of them sat quietly for a moment, not needing to fill the space with more than breath. Across the street, Grady's house stood quiet. His truck hadn't moved in weeks. The blinds never opened anymore. Time had turned his silence from dominance to retreat. But no one spoke his name. The town had already moved on. Inside the center, the front desk bell rang, followed by the sound of a child's voice calling out, "Is Mr. Reese here?" Reese stood, smiling faintly. "That's my cue." He walked back toward the building, shoulders relaxed, steps steady. Lana stood, brushing off her skirt. "You sticking around for movie night?" Shaq shook his head. "Not tonight. I think I'll come by in the morning. Bring donuts." She grinned. "Make sure they're fresh." As she headed inside, Shaq remained on the bench a moment longer, watching the sky change color again. The blue deepening, the air softening, the world tilting gently into evening. The center behind him buzzed with life, with community, with truth that had found its voice not through anger, not through revenge, but through presence, through people showing up, speaking gently but firmly, and staying. Shaq stood slowly, stretching out the old ache in his knees. He looked one last time at the plaque near the restroom door, its message catching the orange light of dusk. Every man deserves dignity. And then, with quiet steps, he walked toward his car. Not to leave, just to rest. Because sometimes, the biggest victories don't come with fanfare. Sometimes the loudest answers come from the quietest rooms. If this story made you feel something good, that means you're still listening, still learning, still awake. Keep that energy alive, talk about the hard truths, honor the quiet heroes, and build spaces where everyone belongs. Because real change doesn't go viral. It grows, one choice, one voice, one town at a time.